Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about requirements management to deal with changes and requirements prioritization. First, this is an outline of my presentation. First, I'm going to talk about why did I choose this topic, and then I'm going to introduce some background of what is requirement management and what is requirement change management. Then I'll talk about an example of my personal experience from what I learned from my work experience. Next, I'll be introducing some methods and process when dealing with changes in the requirement management. And next, I'll be talking about requirement prioritizations, and then it will be the conclusion part. So, why did I choose this topic? Nowadays, people use different software systems every day. When we're planning to go on a trip, we use booking softwares to book flights and look for suitable hotels. When we go to places that we're not familiar with, we use software such as Google Map to help us find the best route. We also use shopping apps so we can shop at home. Then the merchants collect purchasing information through their system and send them to transportation companies such as UPS or FedEx. Then those transportation companies use their system to locate where each package needs to be sent and then arrange the best route. So we can't live without softwares. And a software is designed by developers to better serve people. And one of the most important features of software should be the ease of operability, that people should be able to understand what the software is for, and how to use it. So that leads to the concept of requirement engineering, which is the process of defining, documenting, and maintaining the requirements. It is a process of gathering and defining service provided by the systems. So requirements engineering process is consisting of two parts: the requirement development and requirement management. Requirement development could further divide it into four categories, which are requirement elicitation, requirement specification, requirement verification, and requirement validation. In nowadays fast-paced society, with technology renewal rapidly, changes for softwares are constantly made to accommodate people's needs. So changes in software requirements and requirement prioritization does not only affect people's everyday life, but also plays an important role in the business planning in the bigger picture. So in this presentation, I want to focus on the requirement management when there are changes made to the systems, and how do we deal with those changes, and what are the process and methods we can use when there are changes in the needs to be made in the systems. And also, as one of the most important method, which is called requirement prioritization, I'll also be talking about that. So next, I'm gonna introduce some background information of requirement management. So what is it? Like I said earlier, it is the process of defining, documenting, and maintaining the requirements. It is a process of gathering and defining service provided by the systems. Now, there's a research paper showed that 55% of the projects are not on budget and 60% of the projects are not on time. As you can see in these pictures, it shows like whether it's on budget or on time. And you can see clearly that over half of the percentage that they are not on budget and not on time. So we can see that it's super important that we have a good requirement management, no matter for business or personal wise. And next, I want to talk about a report from the Standish Group. The Standish Group research indicates that one of the most important reasons that the bridges are done on time, in the budget, and do not fall, it's because of the extreme detail design. And based on their research, they analyzed requirement failure according to different company sizes. So the one with annual revenue larger than $500 million, they counted as large companies. And one, annual revenue between 200 and $500 million, they defined as medium companies. And for small companies are the annual revenue between 100 and $200 million. And I have organized them into this chart. And also, from their research, they observed that only 9% of the project in large companies and 16.2% of the projects in medium companies and 28% of the projects in small companies were successful, which is not which is way less than half of the projects. And also 61% of all large company projects were challenged. So also, another research shows that among all the project failure factors, as you can see in this picture, the incomplete requirement weighted 13.1%, which among all the project failure factors. Now we can see that how important it is for requirement management for a successful project. And next I'll be talking about some background information of requirement change management. So requirement change management manage the changes and communicating to relevant stakeholders, and it is a continuous process throughout a project. And based on the research, 31.1% of the project canceled before they even get started, and 52.7% of project will cost 189% of their original estimates. And next, I want to talk about 6 types of changes in requirement management. Here is a table shows all different type of requirements and where are their origins from. And as you can see in this table, um, the first one is enduring requirement that belongs to the stable requirement, which is the basic requirement all organizations used as their basic technique core. And the rest 5 types under changing requirements are mutable requirement, emergent requirement, consequential requirement, adaptive requirement, and migration requirement. So in this listed 6 types of changes in requirement, mutable requirements originally come from the changes of the market. So software requirements by organizations are likely to be placed in an environment which is turbulent and dynamic. Many factors could cause the changes on a requirement, such as market changes, new opportunities add in, changes of government policies, or different structures and management practices are employed. So the rest of 5 competitive environment for mutable requirements are emergent requirements, uh, consequential requirements, adaptive requirements, and migration requirements. So emergent requirements often happen when it's hard for a stakeholder to predict the future of the project and add new changes during the process of development. And consequential requirements happens after the delivery of the project. The adaptive requirements are requirements for change to be an inherent and ongoing capability of the delivered system. And at last, migration requirements are derived from constraints of plant organization development. Next, I want to talk about an example of from my personal experience while I'm working in a company. So from what we learned in class, whenever a project is to be designed, it is very important to know the specific requirement desired before getting started. And we've also talked about different ways to illustrate requirements for different systems, such as use case modeling, frame diagram, and state machines, and, and many other systems. So one example can be used is what I've observed from work experience in a plumbing company. So whenever there are houses need to be constructed for plumbing systems, our scheduling team will communicate with the builders to schedule a time for each specific house. Then the scheduling team will type the city's requirements and builder specific requirements into the system. And after this step, the AutoCAD department will work on the design part of the plumbing system. Then the, and then they will print them out and hand them to the plumbers to the field the following morning, according to the schedule. And then after the plumbers finished one house, the field supervisor will go to the field and check for the quality and report it back to the office. And now everything is paper based, and such as every house architecture plan, the CAD drawings for each house, the option sheet, the spec sheet. However, uh, this new software was designed to be able to meet the requirement that all the requirements from builders, from scheduling team, from CAD teams or supervisors, they can all store their informations in one systems and they can share it between each other. So that when supervisors goes into the field for quality check, the system will assign them to whichever field that is closer to them, depends on where they live. And also, supervisors no longer need to take a pile of paper-based documents for checking. Now they only need to take an iPad with them to check for the city requirements, the CAD drawings, and uploading any pictures they took from the field, and also give feedback to the office from the fields. And the system will also locate where they are and how long they've spent in one house and calculate the best route for checking for supervisors. So for the reason the system is still under developing, I can't explain too many details about it. However, I will use part of the information to illustrate my point. So of course, during the developing of the softwares, there will be a lot of unexpected changes. As when I'm talking to the manager of our IT department, Michael, he told me some changes was made during the development of this project, and I have picked two of them, which I think it's important. So first one of them is at the beginning of the project, they were going to automatically give those supervisors in the field an extended time for their quality check. But later on in the project, the boss decided that he doesn't want it to give automatically extended time for everybody, but they want whoever who needs special needs to report it first, and then after they approved it, the extension time will be given for the specific supervisor. And then the next biggest change is that at the beginning of the project, uh, it is saying that when the system is offline, they don't need to work under an offline conditions. But now they changed the requirement so that the system have to allow them to work as well as in the offline conditions. So according to Michael, he said this kind of changes requires more effort and time to revise, and if it was specified when they first started the project, it would save them a lot of time and work too. So next I'll be talking about the steps for changes in the requirement management. According to a paper written by Dominic Trustworthy, there are 10 steps to better requirement engineering. So next I want to talk about the steps to deal with changes in requirement engineering. According to Dominic Tresversely in the paper 10 Steps to Better Requirement Engineering, these 10 steps could help to make a requirement easier to execute and more specific. And the first one is structure requirement. The second one is manage and link customer needs, requirements and controls, followed by manage constraints and then visualize requirements. The fifth is test requirements and then bridge the chains between business and development. Next, control changes to requirement and then capture and track metrics and trends. The next one will be provide examples of good requirements and then reuse requirements. So from that paper, proper management of changes could better the whole requirement management too. However, not all changes are allowed to add to the requirements. Many factors need to be evaluated before making changes. Only reliable, repeatable changes control process can help turn this challenge into an opportunity. As you can see in this picture, it illustrates when a change is needed to make, how will the process possibly be? Among all the steps, evaluation is the most critical step because it must screen out useful changes that could bring benefit to the system. So, when evaluating changes, several factors could be taken into consideration. Does the changes conflict with existing requirements? And how will those changes affect the design, code, and component of the current project? What kind of impact will those changes affect in the aspect of user interface, database, or reports? Will changes also affect other systems, libraries, or hardware? And also, many project management tools can be used when dealing with requirements and changes. Most of them are related to scheduling activities, so it's not a big problem of finding the correct tools. However, one big method when dealing with requirement selections, it's called requirement prioritization. So here I'm gonna talk about the importance and different methods when dealing with requirement prioritizations. Requirements are prioritized to minimize risk during development so that the most important or high risk requirements are implemented first. And software development facing multiple requirements. So requirement prioritization is necessary when arranging these requirements. And for the same reason, I think that requirement prioritization could also be an essential technique when dealing with changes in the requirement. So when multiple changes or demands needed to be added into the middle of the system, requirement prioritization could help filter out the ones that could bring the most benefit to the system. And as you can see in this chart, it shows when there's new requirements or tasks need to be added into the system, how requirement prioritization plays its part in the whole process. As you can see, when there's new requirement or task is needed to be added in the project, the most important ones are added in at the front, and then the lower priority ones are added in the back. So to maximize the benefit from making a change to a current system, using the correct prioritization method is important depending on what kind of system it is and what kind of changes need to be made. So different prioritization techniques can be used under different conditions. And next, I'm going to talk about different prioritization techniques. So here I'm going to talk about different techniques when dealing with requirement prioritizations. There are 7 techniques. I have 3 on this page and 4 on the next page. So the 7 techniques are ranking, numerical assignment, Moscow technique, bubble sort technique, $100 method, AHP method, and 5 whys. So ranking is to rank all the requirements in a numerical order, such as 1 for the most important one and 10 for the least important one. This technique is useful when there's only one stakeholder, as it could be hard to align from different stakeholders' perspectives. So consider the examples I talked about earlier about the software for the plumbing company. Ranking could be an excellent method to use when managing requirement changes. For example, in the plumbing system project, because only one stakeholder appears in this case, so that no other perspectives will conflict with it. And also, weekly meetings are holding to catch up with constant change demands. So not a whole lot of changes need to identify every time. And next method is called numerical assignment. It's also called grouping. It is to group different requirements into priority groups. For example, when stakeholders have multiple requirement changes, they can group them into must have, may or may not need to change, or don't need to change to identify the prioritization. And the next technique is called Moscow technique. It's very similar to numerical assignment, but in a text format. It uses four priority groups, such as must have, should have, could have, and won't have, to identify the importance of requirements in each group. This method could be used in requirements contains strict standards and rules. And next technique is called bubble sort technique. It's just the same as the bubble sort algorithm when we coding. It is to compare two adjacent requirements and rearrange them based on their importance. Then compare the next two requirements, and so on and so forth until the last one. These requirements should form an order from the most important ones to the least important ones. Again, this is more suitable for a smaller number of requirements. The next method is called the $100 method. It is a method that involves multiple stakeholders. So it assigns different stakeholders $100 or several votes. They can either put the whole $100 on one requirement or split the money into different requirements proportional to how important they value the requirement. Then at the end, money or votes are calculated on each requirement to identify the prioritization of each requirement. This method is also good for a small group of requirements. However, there's one downside of this method is it could be difficult to keep track of how much has been assigned and what amount is left to dispose of. And the next method is called the analytic hierarchy process, also called AHP method. It is developed by Professor Seti, which is a set of multi-criteria decision analysis method for solving complex decision-making problems. It's used to create a framework for a large scale of requirements. Stakeholders split their desires into sub-problems and compare those elements together after the hierarchy is built. The AHP method uses a total number of n times n minus 1 divided by 2 of the comparisons at each hierarchy level. For the best result, this method is better to use within a small amount of requirements. And the last method is called the 5 whys. It is used when stakeholders want to add in additional requirements that weren't in the original plan or doesn't fit in the logical argument of the business. Then the requirements will be rapidly questioned, usually 5 or more times, until the importance of the requirements has been established. This method could be used for a product that deal with the market, which involves rapidly changing demands from customers, such as shopping apps or adding new features on the software. So, uh, Next, I will be talking about different aspects when evaluating a requirement change from three views of point, that is cost, risk, and efficiency. And I'll also analyze these aspects within real-life examples. First of all, I'll be discussing the aspects of prioritization from the aspect of cost. So for companies or personal running organizations, it's essential to have a goal or budget on how much is willing to spend on a project. According to a research, 52.7% of the project cost 189% of their original estimates. So when setting requirements or adding new requirements to a project, some factors need to be taken into consideration, such as will the new requirement require more labors and longer time to finish? Can the new requirement reuse the old code or does it require rewriting the old system? Does the new requirement requires more equipment or document that's going to cost extra money? So an example in the plumbing project can be used to illustrate this aspect. When the project was first started, it was only meant to design a system where the office staff could upload and share the document into one system with the supervisors in the field. However, as the process goes along, more requirements added in, such as the system needs to have functions that allow supervisors view architecture plans under offline condition, allow AutoCAD department to save their DWG file in the system and automatically assign under each address. Also, assign supervisors the field that which is closer to where they live by pulling up the map and calculate the route options. Thus, developers will work a longer time and the schedule got pushed back for rewriting the old code. Also, more workers are hired and more equipment such as computers and iPads are bought to serve the team better. And these are example factors need to be considered before making new requirements to identify if the requirement worth spending that extra money. In such a case, from a developer's perspective, they can use the $100 method, as it shows in this table, and it illustrated from different perspectives, especially in the aspects of cost, risk, and time, which prioritization technique are preferred to use from different perspectives. And next, I want to talk about the risk. The risk of adding new technologies into an existing project is analyzing from both internal and external wise. The internal aspect could be the changes of existing code and software. So several questions to consider, such as does the new requirement require rewriting the existing code? If so, will it erase what has been done or will it cause any crash down of the system? If not, will the new code conflict with the old code causing insufficient content? The external risks could be from the performance aspect, process aspect, and schedule aspects. Examples are whether the new requirements will derive the performance of the software system away from the expectation. Will it delay the original plan, which could cause more money to put in? However, risks like this could be avoided by calculating the risk level of a new requirement. So, the level of a risk can usually be identified based on its estimated risk likelihood and risk impact for each requirement. For example, from the experience from myself from working in a plumbing company, it's my responsibility is for designing the water lines part in the plumbing system in a house. So based on city's requirements, I need to draw the routes for hot and cold water to feed each plumbing features from the main water line from a city to each features in a house. And the original way of doing this is after connected to the main water line. water pipes will be brought up to the attic, then dropped down to each plumbing features. About 6 months ago, a couple of changes were considered to make to increase the profit of the company. The first one of them is to install all pipes underneath the concrete at the roughing stage, then brought up to the plumbing features at the waterline stage. One of the potential risks of this change is that it could lead us uh, lose customers because a lot of builders are used to the old way and been making profit from it. It might be hard for buyers to accept the changes and could lead them to lose their market. However, burying pipes beneath the concrete requires stronger and better insulated materials, and that could also increase the stability of the new system. Moreover, get it done at the roughing stage will also decrease the cost and effort compared to redo it at the waterline stage. It could bring more benefit to home builders and buyers too. The second change is to add gas lines design for each of the houses we do. One advantage of this change is that it will enlarge the range of our service. The downsides are that a lot of plumbers already know the process and locations for adding gas lines in a house. They don't need a paper-based blueprint to tell them what to do. Besides this, doing gas line drawings would require engineers in CAD department to spend more time learning how gas lines runs in a house, the restrictions and figure out the way of creating blueprints. For these reasons, comparing these two requirements, the first one has a lower risk but higher benefit, so the first one was prioritized. And the next aspect of prioritization is efficiency. Efficiency in project planning is crucial too, because the lack of uh, efficiency could lead to extra hours and labors and then increase the cost. And ethical requirements should be able to shorten the time and effort to put in while making sure the quality of the project at the same time. To determine if a new requirement is efficient, we can calculate the level of efficiency by comparing the estimated cost and time needed between the original plan and plan object changes. One example is in the plumbing software project. A new requirement was added. Walk feedbacks are no longer automatically extended. Supervisors who need longer times need to ask for permission for extending first. In this case, only supervisors who have special needs will be given a longer time on providing feedback, instead of everybody upon approval. To avoid unnecessary time wasted and also decrease the money put in for extra working time. So, for the conclusion, requirement management and change management are essential factors when planning a project, as it is highly related to both our work and studies. That's the main reason I chose this topic. And in this presentation, I talked about the backgrounds for requirement management, requirement change management, and also illustrated why it is essential to manage changes. Because according to the report, there are more than 55% of the project are not on the budget, and more than 60% of the project are not on time, which shows how changes affected project planning in a costing and timing manner. An example of a software built by plumbing company was used in illustration of how to deal with those changes in the project planning. And I've also talked about 10 steps processing when managing changes. So, also as one of the most frequently used method in requirement management, requirement prioritization was discussed from techniques to different aspects for analyzing it. And also 7 different techniques were discussed, and examples were provided for each method. And by reading all those research papers for this paper and this presentations done, I've learned a lot of different techniques for requirement prioritizations and also able to analyze requirements from various aspects. And also, I'm able to relate them to my work experience and use them in my work field as the project going on. Another thing I've learned after these research papers is that we should always acquiring as specific requirements as possible for creating a better project. When there are changes needed in the project, obtain as many details as possible too, to analyze the benefit and downside using the process and methods obtained. And that is also the reason I think this is an interesting topic and more people should do more research in any topic that relating to this. And this is the end of my presentation.